I was looking at some comments on the video earlier, and to be honest, I've been looking for the video and I can't find which one it was, so apologies for that. But the comments exchange was to do with theism and belief in God, and particularly strong disbelief to the extent of anti-theism and imagination. And what the thrust of it, if I get this right, seemed to be that that strong anti-theists lack imagination. That was the sense I got from that. But it did get me wondering about the relationship between gods and theism and believability and strong responses in those cases. Because I know there are some definitions of God which I think, at least, are deeply, deeply unimaginative. You know, like if some of the gods that I see bandied around on YouTube, on places like YouTube, if some of those were characters in a story, you'd think that's not a very interesting character, you know, and particularly so given that these unimaginative gods are attributed with all kinds of fantastic powers. You just think that's just not possible. So I think there is a deep connection there between lack of imagination and atheism, in the sense that, you know, if the God that you're opposed to is one that has been so unimaginatively conjured up and constructed, then, you know, of course you shouldn't believe in it. It's ridiculous. Or it's not even a question of belief, is it? You shouldn't spend any time thinking about it because it's deeply stupid. And that's even the case, I think, if it's a God that you happen to be, you know, religiously attached to in some way. I'm guessing here that there are a lot of atheists about, or maybe still practicing religious folk, who recognise that the God that their religion tells them to worship seems to be the product of a very limited imagination, with, you know, just like a big guy who lives in the sky, or a bit like an alien on a foreign planet. You know, it's that kind of a rendition. But then there are gods, and of course I'm not attributing any reality to this, but there are gods which are definitions of God which are a bit more imaginative and a bit more worthy of consideration. Again, that consideration doesn't necessarily need to involve belief. I certainly wouldn't want to do that, but as tools for thinking, you know, some gods are quite interesting. Kind of allied to that, I think there is a sense in which it's not just, this doesn't just apply to gods, because I've had conversations with people, again on YouTube but offline as well, who seem to find it very difficult imagining or believing in some findings of science, because, you know, up until relatively recently, whatever it was that stood in for science, early science, portrayed the picture in a relatively unimaginative way, the picture of the world that we live in relatively unimaginative ways. But the more that science has developed, the more kind of imagination you have to exercise in order to be able to even start to wrap your head around the kind of world that's being described by that science. You know, things like black holes and quarks and multiverses and quantum inseparability and all that kind of stuff, which seems to be, you know, fine, superstrings, which seems to be, you know, the bread and butter of modern science. They're really hard ideas, and you have to kind of, as I say, you have to kind of really exercise your imagination muscles, don't you, to get to grips with some of that stuff. And some people I know don't. You know, some people just refuse to go there, refuse to accept the findings of modern science. And I suspect it is to do with that. I suspect it is to do with, you know, a desire for a more easily encompassed version of what the real world is like. You know, one that's more easily grasped by a more down-to-earth imagination. You know, so in the past, these folk would probably have been happy with a nice simple definition of God, and now they want a nice simple definition of reality. And, you know, any God that should be worthy of the name should be at least demanding of the imagination. And the same seems to be true of modern science, doesn't it? Modern science demands an imaginative engagement. In fact, it might demand an engagement which exceeds our ability to supply that engagement. It's beyond me.